Welcome to Breaking Eggs with Seth Shezi. Breaking Eggs is a visual podcast where Seth talks to creative entrepreneurs, designers, seekers, healers, and thought leaders. During these candid and insightful chats, Seth teases out some nuggets from his exceptional guests that are sure to inspire, entertain, and make you go, huh, when you hear their unique methods of pursuing fulfillment.
I am Seth Shezi. Join me every week as I crack open the lives and learnings of some very special guests. We'll be chatting about the 5 golden pillars of a good life: wellness, wealth, love, mindset, and impact. Through these unscripted chats, I'm looking to uncover untold stories, answer some of my own questions, and hopefully leave you with better ones to ask about your life. This week, my guest is Modupe Oloruntoba, freelance writer and editor of African Fashion Weekly. During this explosive conversation, I pick her incredible mind about her shy formative years, sustainability, and the future of African fashion.
You feel like you're in your element.
Everyone keeps saying that, so I feel like Joburg is doing me good, despite most of my time there having been spent in this pandemic, pandeezy panorama.
I was going to think it's the exact opposite. I thought you were glowing because you are in Cape Town for this few days.
That's an argument to be made. That's possible.
When I see you in Joburg, you're usually stressed. You get a deadline. And you always look like you're chasing something.
Yeah.
But
that's like me 24/7 anyway.
I know.
So when I come to Cape Town, I'm on a I'm on a working holiday. Before we started filming here, you saw me like typing away on my laptop.
Of course, There's always a moment for you to like get something in. But where does that drive and that run come from?
Where does it come from? I don't know. I think it's a combination of things. I don't think it's a single source. I think it's personality at play. Like everything's interconnected because nothing is in a silo. Your personality is not in a silo. Your upbringing isn't in a silo.
Everything
world
bleeds into
and
each other.
And your environment and the relationship that plays out between those things over your lifetime shapes who you are.
Of course.
And so I think it's a combination of things. I think it is like some things to do with my personality and character. Like just being interested in the world, being very much fueled by discovery. I get very bored if I'm not learning new things. Being a curious person. And also just the upbringing, I guess, of like a milder version of what most people would say is like a stereotypical Nigerian upbringing.
Oh, yeah?
Like I'm really inspired by my family, actually. Like I've got incredible people in my family. My parents, uncles and aunts, all doing like amazing things and just really valuing education, really valuing quality of work, really valuing giving something to the world with this time that you're going to spend. I think I've like heard different people's experiences that in the same situation, it became an intimidating thing to live up to. My family more inspires me to live up to like who they are. Yeah. Like I went to, we buried my grandfather a couple of years ago. And just the number of people who came to pay their respects and the stories I was hearing, mostly for the first time, about who he was and what he did for people and how he showed up for them through his career, but also just off duty and in his own time. It was such a legacy, and it was such an inspiring
sort of like narrative to have.
And me wanting there's a desire that I have to do that or do better because of the platform that like such incredible people have given me. I feel like they've given me such a great start,
but
I want to do something with that.
Now, how do you not cave under sort of like what most people would describe as pressure of living up to that lineage? So a lot of people would sort of like cave under that pressure, but you seem to have risen to it and taken it as a positive thing and said, well, I've been shown this example.
So for all the ways that I've felt really like different, out of place and different over my life.
Tell me about that, because I look at you as like a star, so like it's weird for me to
we'll talk about that. For all of those different things, I've still felt like these key characteristics that I've grown to love about myself are things that I have in common with my family.
Okay.
So it's the stuff that I also think is going to like kind of define whether I'm able to do these things that I want to do or not. And so I kind of, it's something that connects us and not something that separates us, and I don't feel like there's this massive gap between me and them in terms of accomplishment, which is not to say that it always is like I wake up every day and think, oh, they're so amazing and I'm going to be amazing just like them. I definitely sometimes think, why is it taking me so long? Or
is that self-brought on pressure, or is it because there are certain expectations?
It is definitely self-brought on. And I think that's also contributed to why I find it more inspiring than intimidating. They're not placing like crazy expectations.
That's beautiful.
Like my uncle, I have the one uncle who's always joking about when is the next one of us going to get a master's or a PhD?
Yeah.
He's bored. He hasn't attended a graduation in so long. But it's always lighthearted and like jokes, and never a thing of like, I'd say a toxic side of Yoruba culture is doing those kind of things or getting these kind of accomplishments and achievements in order to one-up other people around you. And my family, both sides of my family, my dad's and my mom's, we've never really engaged in that. There's achievement for achievement's sake, for honor's sake, for family pride, for like something that is a good reflection of your Christian walk bearing fruit in your life, but never something that's been we have to do it because the people across the street have 2 masters.
So it's more
so we need a
inward
doctor in the
not
family.
like outward. Okay, beautiful. And when did you move to South Africa?
I was 3 when we left Nigeria. We lived in Lesotho for 9 years. And then after that, we were in the Free State while... we moved to the Free State. We moved to Ladybrand, where we were already going to school. We crossed the border every day.
Ladybrand in the Free State?
Yes, it's a little, it's a little town on the edge of the Free State. When we lived in Maseru, and we were not the only people who did this, but it sounds crazy to people when I say it, that we would cross the national border every day to go to school. So just driving across the Lesotho South Africa border, you say hi to
Why? Because there was a nicer
agents.
School there.
It was a good school. It was a private Christian school, and my parents had been talking to friends of theirs who had kids in that school. They liked the idea of the place, and it was a great school. So we went there for a while. We were in the Free State. We actually moved to the town where the school is for the last bit of my time at that school. Because my dad had gotten a job in the Eastern Cape. So we were just like wrapping up the school year, I think. I don't remember how long we were there. And then moved to the Eastern Cape, where I finished high school. And then I moved to Cape Town to study fashion design. And I was here for another 5 years after my studies.
Where did you study
And then moved
fashion
to
design?
Joburg. I went to CPUT.
Cool.
Yeah.
How was that?
Interesting.
I think you had gone there with the idea that you wanted to be in fashion design, correct?
Yes. So I had, during high school, or even earlier than high school, started exploring different design disciplines. Probably, like, original credit for that is probably due to, like, top billing.
That's inspiring.
And there was the glamour of it, but there was also, like, looking at architecture and being like, wow, how did somebody do that?
Absolutely.
And looking at travel and just being like, there is so much to see in the world. So
say what you will about that show, but it gave us
shout out to
something.
top billing.
It gave us something.
It did.
Cool.
So I was cycling through an interest in different disciplines of design at the time. I think sparked by top billing and sparked by interior design. Architecture, for some reason, never occurred to me. Maybe it should have. But through that kind of intro to that world and now a curiosity about that world through magazines, I developed an interest in fashion. And fashion stuck because it was the only one that never bored me. With the others, I would get through, and this is something I go through with a lot of the things I'm curious about. I'm curious about it. I become obsessed. I take this shiny thing that's caught my attention and I pick it up and I turn it around. And once I feel like I understand it, I'm bored.
Of course. But I think that, again, I feel like I've said this to you before, that's a genius's curse. Because like the genius is always seeking and trying to find the next thing. And I think you're just like turning all the rocks and say, what's under it?
And so I think it's great that I turned over so many rocks, because eventually just like a layman's basic knowledge of a lot of those different things has definitely served me in the things that I have deeper knowledge about. But fashion was the thing that just never really seemed to bore me. And that's not to say that over 8.5 years now working in fashion that I haven't been jaded at times or disinterested. But overall, I find fashion fascinating from so many angles because it's so many things at the same time. It's self-expression. It's like a store of anthropological history.
Of course, yeah.
It's science when you look at textile development. It is social economic development when you look at how it hires women from every point of the value chain, every point of the supply chain of fashion hires more women than industries of its
course.
size.
Yeah, completely.
So yeah, fashion, I just developed this point of view that it could be a real growth lever for the continent. It could be one of several solutions for unemployment, that it could be, that fashion could do more than be shiny and pretty.
So then what was the turning point where you decided, cool, I don't want to embark on fashion from a design point of view. I actually want to be a scholar of fashion. I want to do it more from an academic point of view.
Okay. I don't know that I ever chose like an academic point of view, but I did choose like the writing or the media side of it. And it was
But I
basically
feel like
through...
the way that you approach fashion, even in the way that you write about it, is quite scholarly. It's not like...
I guess.
Yeah.
I think I feel like I need to understand its moving parts beyond the surface if I'm going to, I guess, create work that manifests this point of view that fashion is more than shiny and pretty, or can be more than shiny or pretty. And so that informs my approach to like reading about it, writing about it. But basically what happened was that I went to CPUT with a mountain of expectations.
Yeah. I guess we all kind of have those expectations. I remember when I first went to university, I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't what I got out of it.
Yeah. So I was expecting, I think, I'd idealized the idea of fashion school on the academic side and on the social side. Because like I told you before, like I spent a lot of time feeling out of place and feeling a little bit different from people around me. I think just social challenges in general. I don't know that I can call it social anxiety, but it's something within that world.
Okay.
And then also just being around people in high school who were so, like, our interests were so different.
Okay.
My older sister is more the social chameleon. Like, she can relate and connect to different groups of people very quickly without, like, losing herself.
Yeah.
Whereas I felt sometimes like I was speaking a different language from people.
Wow.
So
But do you think a lot of that was in your head? Because
I know now that some of it was.
Yeah, because you know how relatable and how loved you are, and how, I mean, people seek you out. I mean, when I first used to ask you for opinions about things, we didn't even really know each other. But I just felt like you're always the sounding board that I needed.
But that's the stuff I love. I love to share when our interests are aligned. But I think I was more open by the time you met me and by the time other people had met me, because I now kind of embraced what I knew I had to offer in friendships, in work relationships, and whatever it was. But back then, feeling so different, I kind of just put all this expectation on CPUT that because we were all there to study fashion, I was just going to immediately, automatically connect with everybody and we'd be chill and we'd be friends, and
that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. I had some wonderful classmates, but I had put more on just the fashion design program than it was maybe able to even deliver to me. I think I was looking for acceptance more than I knew. And so just like the size of that versus the size of what like a group of strangers and a fashion design program can actually give you, it was mismatched. So my expectations were off on that side. I also had glamorized the fashion school aspect of it. Yeah. And
it's because we all look at the Vogue London College, and we think that a lot of it is like that. But
for me, it was Parsons. It was Parsons Paris and Parsons New York.
No, but Parsons is quite hard though. They tell the story of how difficult and unglamorous it is.
Yes, but I thought it's difficult and unglamorous, and I'm gonna make it in that setting. It was Parsons Paris.
So your tenacity
was
still pushing you through.
Yeah,
which is a good thing.
It was, I think so, for the most part, and also CSM, Central St. Martin's. Just we were all obsessed with those spaces. But I think
what can you say? Because I think your perception was not unique. I think everyone else who's still starting up now, who's fascinated with fashion beyond just clothes, probably does look at those schools and idealize them and think that, wow, I can't, wait to go there.
Yeah.
Mostly because they're not looking at the fact that actually going to school will still require a lot of sweat and tears at times and deadlines and lots of unglamorous work. Because you have such great shining examples of people. You get to look at all of the designers who've gone there. Everyone looks at McQueen. He went to St. Martin's, right?
Yes, he did.
And you get to look at what's the Fab Five? I'm sure they're not called the Fab Five. Like Dries Van Noten, Magella.
Yeah.
And so you look at people like that and you think, okay, cool. So all those people who go to schools X then get to do this. And even the contemporary ones, Mark Jacobs, he went to Parsons, no?
I think so.
Yeah, and so you have very glamorous examples
of
people living out their dreams now.
Yeah.
And you don't know the work that comes before it. And so then you've gone through that journey and been jaded, and then you've come on the other side and now you're smiling again.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who just that stage?
I would say prepare to be disappointed if you're idealizing it, and rather try and look at the more rugged beauty. There's idealistic beauty, and then there's the beauty of the actual thing, the reality. Just because it's hard and unglamorous doesn't mean it isn't beautiful in its own way. It's just about rejecting the idealized beauty for the actual thing that's in front of you, accepting it for what it is, embracing it for what it is, and then also.
So what is it?
What is it?
If you strip the glamour away.
It's a job. It's a job. Something I'm always telling people is that when you work in the fashion industry, the industry is the glamour factory, right? It's not the end product. It's not the end user experience. You're producing that. So you'll get some glitter on your fingers while you're producing that, but it's not for you. You're behind the camera, and you have to kind of fall in love with the process and fall in love with the work there. And I think that was kind of the thing that kept me in the program, and that kept me there even when I decided that it wasn't going to be design for me anymore, but it was still going to be the fashion industry. I like the moving parts. I like the wheels and just watching the thing actually come together and looking at the massive machine that the industry is. I don't like all of it. The industry can be very problematic, especially in terms of labor ethics and all that stuff.
But every industry, I don't know if that's something unique to fashion.
It's not. It's definitely not.
In fashion, it's probably the most polarized, purely because everyone touches fashion.
It's because everyone touches fashion. It's because everyone wears clothes, but it's also because fashion, at least at the luxury end, projects this incredibly glamorous image. So I think once the curtain is drawn open and consumers are looking at what's behind the curtain, they're sometimes shook by child labor, by what it takes to harvest cotton, and
of course, and the crocodile wallet that I have,
Yeah.
But is that fashion? Or because for me, how I think about it is, every industry that sells an intangible dream beyond the object, that's where we fall short. Not on the actual product. Not the
it's both. So it's that when everything you're talking about is the dream that fashion sells.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you want to have a holistic picture of something and look at it from its different angles, yes, you're selling the dream, but that dream does have a cost.
Yeah,
it has a real cost. Completely. And so the backside of that, or the behind the scenes side of that, and being transparent about what it takes to produce the products that this dream is projected onto.
Yes.
That's also a conversation that needs to be had. And it gets in the way of the dream because it can be very ugly. It's not fashion specific, but I've been so focused on fashion for so long that I am deeply familiar with the unique way that it plays out in our industry. And so that's a perspective I would speak on.
Do you task yourself as being a warrior to try and fix those problems?
I do not. I applaud people who do, but I don't task myself because I don't believe. I believe the world is fundamentally flawed. I believe we're fundamentally flawed, and I believe those flaws can be.
And we all function within a system that is flawed. So
and the system is flawed. Anything
flawed.
Man-made, flawed system.
Yeah.
Because we don't have enough perspective outside of what serves us and does well for us to make things that aren't flawed in that way. And it's just human nature. And I think I'm okay with that. I just think those things need to be managed. You can't eradicate the idea that human beings are flawed.
Yeah.
So that is also like not a fashion specific problem. I don't think any of those things can be eradicated. I think they can be managed. And where we'll argue, debate, whatever, is on how best to manage those flaws in the systems, in the products, in whatever it is, because of the flaws in human beings.
So I guess,
but I don't, that's also like not my main goal with fashion. I think I defined it a few years ago as I want to look back. I don't know how, I don't know all of the moving pieces of how, but I want to look back in 20 years and say, here are the ways that I tangibly moved African fashion forward. Here are the ways that I made the shiny, pretty thing count in real ways for the continent.
Do you have that blueprint already? Do you know what it is you want to do to basically move that needle?
Yeah, so I'd say I'm at a little bit of a crossroads in terms of the how. I have started the newsletter, which you know about, African Fashion Weekly. Please go subscribe. I started the newsletter and I wanted to be...
Well, don't gloss over it. Tell me a little bit more about the newsletter.
Yeah, so I wanted to be it's an ongoing, on-the-ground conversation about the African fashion industry.
Yeah.
I noticed a few years ago that like even when fashion, I don't know, had some of its healthy ecosystem pieces, which we don't anymore. Like people think not having magazines is just, oh, well, magazines are gone. There's a big fat hole in the ecosystem for fashion. Like without magazines, showrooms die. And like, it's a whole thing.
No, explain that whole thing. Like, because we don't know this and you're the only person who has a view, like a bird's eye view into all of it. So tell us what's the ramifications.
What it is fashion is a system that revolves around designers and revolves around their businesses, but does not only involve designers and their businesses. So designers and their businesses and a healthy array of fashion businesses being available and the public responding to those, well, fingers crossed, means models, means handcraft, skilled craftspeople. It means administration and finance people. It means logistics and operations. It means a whole bunch of things that are connected to it because capitalist society and this is how we do business. And at the end of the day, fashion is product. So when the promotion arm, for example, of that, which was for a long time led by magazines, when the promotion arm of that fails, or to be more accurate, when it changes, things that depended on the system looking a certain way and behaving a certain way either need to shift or they'll also fail. So, for example, showrooms are, I'd say, a problem that we've had in South African fashion for a very long time, where we've had a handful of good ones. Over time, not nearly enough, but also not enough demand to create more showrooms that function well for stylists to pull from, for magazines to pull from, where designers basically pay showrooms to handle that end of PR, which is to lend out clothes for them to get shot. To lend out clothes for them to get shot on celebrities or in a magazine or even, I guess, in an ad for another product, like someone wearing Richard Mnisi in a car ad, for example. So when there isn't demand from the magazine side, there's not enough for a showroom to do. And if there isn't enough for them to do, that's not a feasible business model anymore. And then the showroom shuts down. And then stylists can't get hold of SA fashion. And then people are complaining on Twitter that, oh my goodness, these stylists, all they do is shoot H&M because they can get their hands on H&M and they can't get their hands on designer stuff anymore, not in one place. And they can't run to 17 different designers on their own. Most stylists are independent and they don't have like, I don't know, a massive business funding all of their shopping trips for a shoot or for a magazine or for
Okay, but then one would argue the fact that the consumption of fashion in a form of like an advert doesn't die just because print is dwindling.
No. So that's why I said it can, different parts of the system, when something shifts, either the rest of the system needs to shift with it or something's going to die off. So with showrooms, I do think that there could have been more change without them actually having to like pull back. But then it's also like whoever's doing that has to innovate and has to figure out a new way of working, because there's no model for that that's shown to you. So if you are somebody who ran a showroom and now kind of the demand has completely changed because magazines are different, because styling is different, the onus is on you, I guess, to innovate toward where that kind of content that needs rented clothing, that needs clothing lent out, is headed now. But it's also an expensive experiment, because you don't know if it'll work. You don't know if the demand is shaped so differently in this place that it just doesn't matter anymore, because, oh, well, a lot of the online content creators get press drops and get discounts from the different brands that they work with. Why do they need to lend clothing from the designers you represent when those aren't brands that are working with them in a transactional manner? So there's a lot of things that need experimentation and that need you to kind of take a chance on something. And at the scale of our industry, I understand that a lot of people don't want to take that chance, or if they want to take that chance, they can't afford to.
Of course, yeah.
So,
But I guess then ultimately it ends up being, okay, well, if you can pivot, then sure. If you can't, then, because I guess magazines as well, if we're going to put them at the center of this, they're the ones with the biggest burden to have to live with the fact that this industry that's gone in a certain way for all of these years now has to basically change. And if they can find a way of changing that and adopt the digital world, so can all the peripheral businesses that depend on it.
Yes, and I think some can and some cannot. It really depends on what's going on internally, because how a business operates internally can seem to have nothing to do with the magazine you actually get on the newsstand. What appears important in terms of content might not actually be important in terms of the bottom line. So it comes down to rands and cents. And it comes down to the decisions of the people who control the rands and cents and what they believe in and what they think is going to work. And that's killed many a magazine. Of course, but it's also saved a lot of brands where people understood, okay, no, our value to the people that read our magazine or have formed our community, our value is in something beyond having a magazine to hold. Our value is in something beyond giving them something to shop. We're a brand they believe in for different reasons, and we can leverage those reasons. We can double down on those reasons through experiences, for example, or hotels. I think it's Elle magazine now internationally that's opening hotels. Okay. There's Elle opening hotels, there's Bulgari opening hotels. Yes, a lot of people are getting into experiences. But when you've got a strong brand that can live on beyond the product that it became a brand for, you've got options. But you need to be able to see it that way, and you need to be able to afford to take a chance on going in that direction.
Now, for you, what interests you about South Africa or the African fashion landscape at the moment? Because one could argue that it's a little barren, except for a handful of designers that have made it through. And also, even some of the ones that have made it through, there's still not a hell of a lot of quality that can be associated with it, because sometimes the corners need to be cut because, just to meet your bottom lines and things like that. But then, can we be proud of it? Because now you're wearing this designer who's a hotshot, great designs, but it's polyester. Should we be bastardizing polyester? Maybe polyester is fine, actually.
We shouldn't be bastardizing polyester.
There's a lot of all these questions that I think are always placed onto African fashion as a whole, because it's still on the rise. And somehow it's being pegged against what the Western fashion, which is all established and everything. And it's always going to seem like a stepchild. So take me through that whole sort of perception and where should we find ourselves? Should we even care about African fashion?
We should care about African fashion. We should not. I think we are on our way out of viewing it as a stepchild.
And I also want to hear your definition of African fashion, because you're not talking about garb and traditional regalia. We're talking about Africa that's manufactured in Africa. Cool.
So my definition of African fashion is that it is a geographical category. It's really just like a logistical term to me. It's an operations term. It's not a creative identity. African fashion is not a creative identity.
I love that.
These designers are really telling very different stories. And I know you said that it's like a handful, but it's a handful that's visible. I think one of the problems I've spotted is how fractured we are, I guess, across Anglophone Africa and Francophone Africa is one example. Across West Africa and Southern Africa is another example. We've got a lot of stories that are being told, but we're also very fractured in that. I think it was Omoyemi Akerele, who runs Lagos Fashion Week, who said in a talk that we have an ecosystem but not necessarily an industry. And I think she was speaking to the same thing I'm talking about here, which is that all of these moving pieces aren't necessarily connected in the most efficient way or in the most beneficial way, in a way that's designed for growth.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that I want to talk about in the newsletter.
Yeah.
On top of profiling businesses, on top of covering headlines, because I do want to offer news as well as insight.
Yeah.
And
so one of the things that I was thinking was, if we see that as a problem, sort of like the schism, if you could call it that, what do you think is the solution to that? Would you say that like having magazines would have been that solution, and now that we are slightly beyond that, the solution to that is having a newsletter which basically looks at the landscape, not just South African fashion, Nigerian fashion, but looks at African fashion and tries to put that into one almost homogeneous platform to make sure that everyone from everywhere can consume it so that they get to learn and understand? Is that what you think?
I don't know that the platform being homogenous is like necessary. I think a handful of platforms all doing different jobs and helping us in different ways is probably a good way to go. But I don't think that any one of those things is the solution.
Okay.
I think the solution really just depends on a foundation of shared goals and time. We have to remember like how young
Of course.
our democracies are, how young our industries are, how young our ecosystems are. We haven't been doing this for as long as a lot of the world. And I know you talked about African fashion kind of, did you say stepchild?
It feels that way because
that's actually something that I'll be addressing in an essay that I've written for a book that's coming out.
Okay.
A gig you helped me get. Thank you very much.
Yes. Are you allowed to talk about it yet?
I don't know. I haven't signed anything, so I'm like
I couldn't
confused.
think of anyone better.
I've definitely
than
talked
you
about it, but like to friends and like very casually, because I haven't signed anything. But I don't know if I can like formally announce it or something.
Maybe don't give out the context, the actual content, but like you can give context around it.
Yeah. So it's a book about creativity in the global South and the maturity of creativity and organizations of creativity, the creative industry, creative ecosystems in the global South, and I guess people whose work represents the difference that we have now, or the things that we've shifted. And my essay is about how I used to think that, all we need is infrastructure and time. All we need is education. All we need is this and that, and we can catch up. We can match or exceed the global North. And actually, what we needed was a mindset shift, and what we needed was very different goals. Like the goal is not to emulate the global North, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
Now that
and
there's
also,
been
especially
all of this,
when we know what we know now in terms of where some of the errors, and we shouldn't be aiming to repeat some of those mistakes.
we're in such a good position to not repeat the mistakes and to also offer the world like a completely different way of doing things. If we can be bold and imagine that way of doing things and bring it to life and make it real and then offer it to the world. I really think African fashion can do a lot, not just for employment on the continent, for example, but for the global fashion industry and offering a different way of doing things. I really think we're headed toward, and I hate to say this because it takes people down the wrong path of like Web3 and crypto, but I think we're headed toward decentralized industry. I think we're headed toward a network of many nodes in terms of manufacture, in terms of creative collaboration, in terms of everything that's required for fashion to be produced and to move forward. And I think because we're headed there because African creative industry players are thinking differently now, but they're also thinking differently because we're headed there. It's just a shift in the world that is happening that people are waking up to and participating in. And I think the results are going to be very exciting.
What was probably necessary was for, I think, the people within the continent to start perceiving it differently rather than expecting people outside of the continent, like from the West, to then be the ones that sort of almost inform the change. The change needed to come from within.
Yeah.
And that's why I was saying to you, I think I will celebrate once we get to a point where I have more than a handful of designers to talk about proudly. I want to know a lot more of them, and not all of them need to be South African, because I think part of the success of Europe, for instance, is the fact that the fashion landscape is almost borderless.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean? How the consumer consumes it and perceives it. Like, it's not foreign or strange for someone to be wearing Celine put together with Gucci and, I don't know, and Dries Van Noten, and you've got Belgium, France, and Italy coming together. Here, if you're wearing a South African designer, you're wearing a South African designer.
Head to
you're
toe.
wearing a Nigerian designer. We haven't got to that point where there's comfort in being able to mix all the different sort of like languages and different forms of expression.
Because we don't necessarily always have access to all of those things. Like, one thing that's
But I think
really frustrated me, and
yeah.
I've been working with a men's beard oil brand on and off for the past year.
Yeah.
I will plug you. And they basically, working with them showed me kind of the reality. I knew it was difficult to ship across the continent.
Yeah.
Working with them, like, I came face to face with the reality of like what it takes to ship across the continent. It is easier to send something from Johannesburg to London than it is to send it from Johannesburg to Lagos.
Of course.
But those are kind of infrastructure gaps that need closing. I mean, DHL is there, but also they're completely unchallenged, and I think the rates are just insane. So there's different moving pieces to it, as with everything. And I think there's no one solution. Everybody's just got to pick their lane. Now that we've had this mindset shift, now that we have this perception shift where the global north is no longer the goal, and we can, from that point of view, just everybody pick their lane and do your work and get things to where it needs to be, which is not the global north's standards. That's also a mindset shift that needs to happen. So they set the standard, but that standard in a lot of ways was defined by cost-benefit analysis that they made that we think differently about, for example. We don't think the planet can pay the price, a lot of us. If you've decided the planet can't pay the price, then you're going to do things differently than they did. And so we're not just revising a playbook, we're writing a new one. And I really think, yes, there will be a lot more power, I guess, or efficacy in doing it together. But that's also not, at least in the creative industries, something that we've had going on for a long time. Something that even foreign policy has made easy. Like, you talk about somebody who's wearing a French designer, a Belgian designer, an Italian designer in the same outfit. I think the organization and collaboration across the EU has probably helped make that possible. How well have we used the AU? How well have we used the African Union? We have the African Free Trade Agreement, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement now. How well have we used it? Or how well are we going to use it?
Well,
it's a piece of policy that's difficult to
used
actually
to even
execute.
Get logistics and a better network?
That was the thing I was most excited about. I thought, oh my goodness, we're going to solve this intercontinental shipping problem using the free trade
But that's
agreement.
because we didn't have you then. You know, for me,
I don't know how to solve that problem. I want to write about that problem on the newsletter and send it to somebody in logistics
behind it,
so they can go, I can solve that.
I love the idea of your newsletter, African Weekly.
African Fashion Weekly.
AfricanFashionWeekly.com. But I see your role being way beyond that. So, for instance, when I was faced with an opportunity where the biggest trend forecaster in the world came to me looking for a bright young mind that has a view, an intellectual view of where fashion is in Africa and where it's potentially going, what will get it there and what might stop it from getting there. I couldn't think of anyone else besides you. Like I didn't recommend you because I thought that, oh, cool, there's other people and I like her the most. No, because yes, obviously I would want it to be you because obviously I like you. But beyond that, it was more the fact that you are the only thing that comes to mind. You are, as a single unit, the business of fashion of Africa. And
that's for sure.
And I think that if you think that right now we are basically in the process of rewriting the story of fashion in Africa, well, I think that you're holding the pen, and that should go beyond your newsletter. The newsletter is the starting point.
The newsletter is the starting point. I do want to build out a fully fledged news media brand,
Yes,
like the way that we
yes,
experience them out in the
yes,
world today.
yeah.
Something with events, something
Yeah.
with insight products that we
Exactly.
sell, something with consulting.
Yeah. Because
All
you
of those
also mentioned the
things.
fact that like part of the reason why you won't find people mixing different African brands together is, yes, logistics is an issue, but also the fact that the demand isn't there. I'm like, well, the demand needs to be informed. And if there's no platform that's educating us and showing us that we can actually realistically style ourselves at the most superficial level, just style ourselves across
Yeah.
countries on the continent, no one's going to do it because it hasn't been shown to us.
I mean, now that retail and e-commerce and department store brands, I guess I could call them, have also started doing a lot of their own content, that's starting to come around. So
Okay.
you've got Industry Africa has got their publication called Imprint.
Yeah.
And so them and people like them or businesses like them are creating content where they've mixed, let's say, Maki-O, for example, with Richard Nisi, with Orange Culture, with Tebe Magugu. And it's not happening enough, not yet, but that is also another thing. Whenever people say, when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? I want to show them the timeline of like how long Paris has been a center of cultural power, and how long Paris has been home of couture,
Yeah.
and a timeline of how long African fashion has been going, which actually is longer than a lot of people think, but has been like all of these single stars
Yeah.
making it work,
Yeah.
and no ecosystem and no industry to support them and to like
Yeah.
accelerate their growth. And we've only had even the few elements that we have for not nearly long enough for people to be making the kind of comparisons that they're making.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think the people, I'm not the only person who wants these things to work,
Yeah.
who wants to take African fashion to another level that isn't defined by the levels of the global north. And I think if you can give us a little time and a little support and a little
But we
just like
live
response. I think there's also the consumer education
Yeah.
thing of like, we're on a continent where the vast majority of the population is more worried about what they're going to eat tomorrow than about designer fashion.
That's still a
So
reality, yeah.
That's also something that you have to consider in terms of the speed of growth.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's different elements at play, and there's actually a very different result to be had. One that I think we'll be proud of and happy with. But yeah.
But my impatience, I think, stems from the fact that Africa is so fast and growing at such a rapid rate when it comes to tech. The fact that because on a tech side, the growth is here. You know, it's the one place where like mobile devices are basically being bought at a rapid rate because there's still a lot more people that need them in their hands. And so if we are at that age, surely then we can sort of like, you know, expedite the process of disseminating that information. And even, I remember there's a friend of mine, he is from Paris, and he used to be the editor for The Gentlewoman.
Okay.
And he did a piece, which I think might have ended up on Business of Fashion or whatever. And he profiled, and this was well before COVID, so say 2018. And he profiled, you know, standout voices in Africa. It was Rich, Laduma, and Orange from Nigeria.
Orange Culture.
Orange Culture.
Adebayo, yeah.
Yeah, and Tebe Magugu, and I think either Nick Kutz or Lukanyum Dengue at the time, you know. Okay, now we're here. We've had an entire pandemic in that time period, and we're trying to recover from it. There's now monkeypox. Times have changed a lot, you know. And yet those are still the same people that we are quoting.
There are other people coming up behind them.
We
is
need-
number
we need
one.
to- we need to know
right?
them.
We need to know them. We do need to know them. We need to kind of bring a bunch of things together to support the visibility of these designers, and to go beyond visibility to the kind of support and engagement that results in strong, sustainable sales for these businesses. And we're getting there with some of them. I think people also are always looking at the contemporary designer tier for growth and not necessarily anywhere else. South Africa has 2-3 really, truly incredible sneaker brands right now that are exhibiting amazing growth.
Like
I'm
what?
trying to get
Who
hold
are they?
I'm trying to get hold of the founder of Drip.
Okay.
To talk to him about
Drip, yes.
Yeah, so there's Drip, there's Batu, there's Mpahla.
Okay.
So
And
there's
I
that
went,
kind of growth happening. And yeah, the contemporary designer tier it's glamorous, it's beautiful,
Yeah.
it's contemporary African stories that
Yeah.
we love and relate to. So that's where everybody's
like the
looking.
Tebe dresses that are on for Vogue at the moment.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
As always, Tebe.
I mean, yeah, well, you're not biased because it's one of your best friends, obviously. I was just so happy, and I feel so patriotic. Well, not patriotic. Like, I don't know. Like, what?
Proud.
When you like
Yeah.
your specific culture. What is it? Not tribalist.
I don't know, it is patriotism, but that's like national.
Yeah, but I felt very close to it, so much so that like I hardly ever have the time because I consume like social media so fast. I never really stopped to like comment on things and stuff, but I had to comment on the Zulu one just, you know, just because
that is the most Zulu thing I've ever
we
seen
all
you
like
do.
No, I know. But we all like to be seen. And I think that when you can do something and make it universal, and there's nothing that can be so uniting than fashion.
Yeah.
And that's why for me, it's always like, if I sound frustrated, it's because I feel like there's so many messages that are basically being spoken within the continent, but a lot of them are not being amplified beyond where they need to go to.
So I'm seeing a lot of seeds planted, and it's the things. These are the things that combine to kind of create the urgency in my mind that okay, this African Fashion Weekly thing, you have to do this now.
Yes.
You've got to do this now,
and it needs to be weekly, right?
And it needs to be weekly.
Yeah.
Please, like drag me.
Yes.
If it's not weekly, just like bully me.
No. From now on, we've shooken it. We've shooken it. You will make sure it's weekly.
Done.
Cool. Fantastic.
My accountability coach will be very happy to see that.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is, you obviously, anyone can tell, this is a short amount of time to try and condense everything that you've achieved. But I can tell that beyond fashion, you obviously want to understand how it all works and how the cogs all fit in together. Why is it that when I go into your website, it says... I'll read it so that I don't misquote you.
Okay.
Because, Modupe
Oloruntoba, yes.
I said it.
You said it. You got
is
it.
a writer in Johannesburg, South Africa. She writes African Fashion Weekly and is available to lead and contribute to content projects across Africa. Across Africa in fashion, beauty, and the creative industries.
Yes.
You do so much more than that sentence says.
I'm trying to boil it down. I'm trying to make it simple. And I'm also trying to like direct it in... That does need updating. That's a few months old. But I'm trying to kind of direct it toward the kind of work that I want to do.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say, oh, hey, I'm a writer, hire me, because then that brings me work that I don't actually want to do.
Yeah.
I'm trying to filter everything now by what I told you before about how I've given my career the purpose of moving African fashion forward.
Yeah.
So when a project comes my way, does it move African fashion forward, yes or no? First.
Yeah.
Before we talk about the details of the project, we just looking at the objectives of the project when it's done, if it's done well, if it's done right, does it move African fashion forward?
Yeah.
Before we talk about money, before we talk about scope and timings and blah, blah, blah.
Without forgetting money. Because we must get paid. At this point, you need to be, chairing the movement to get people to pay for content. People should be subscribing to newsletters. People should be paying for every piece of content. Because that's what we need. That's how we're going to make
Someone's
sure
already asked me, and I don't have 100 subscribers on the newsletter yet, and someone's already asked me, like, you launched the thing. Oh, I thought you'd be charging for this. And I was like, I'm not even at 100 subscribers yet. And she's like, I was like, oh, okay.
But that speaks to the quality of the content. So keep it going, educators.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
But
on that front, where you mentioned tech before, so like tech has made it incredibly simple. Like the platform that I use for the newsletter is purpose built for newsletters and purpose built for people who want to be content entrepreneurs using something like a newsletter, and has like a bunch of tools on the back end that are geared like specifically toward that. But tech is also something that's really moving forward. Moving fashion forward in ways that aren't necessarily like super visible. If like someone's curious, they can look up. So you can look up what's happening in fashion with RFID tags. You can look up a company called Wire Collective that is using blockchain technology to transform logistics in African fashion specifically. They're doing some great work in Kenya. But I think tech in general, just to go back to what you said before, tech has made everyone incredibly impatient because tech is a very high leverage product. So someone spends a year, 2 years, 3 years creating a piece of code or creating a tech product that solves a problem in a very scalable way, right? But once they've solved that, right, they're still going to make features and add on to its capabilities forever. But once they've solved that, they've done pretty much all of the work that is value adding to that thing. And then now all they need to do is sell to as many people as possible. That is not how fashion works. Fashion is not a high leverage product. It's very laborious. It's very resource intensive. And that also makes it a very difficult business to be in. So if you're expecting fashion to operate like tech, don't expect that. I think the only fashion businesses that mirror tech are e-commerce businesses because they're not manufacturing. Anybody who has to manufacture fashion, don't expect it to behave like tech.
So, like I suspected, you are not a one-episode person. Trying to sum up your life story and then go into what you're busy with now, all in an hour, has basically seemed futile. So I think we've just scraped the surface.
We will have to do this
We'll
again.
have to sit down again.
Come to Joburg. Come visit.
I actually am. I'm coming. I've got a few interviews lined up there, so I'll see you there again.
I'll see you
Thank
there.
you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And
for
your
having me.
candor, and in letting me pick your beautiful brain.
Hi, I'm Modupe Oloruntoba, and you are watching Breaking Eggs with Seth Shezi.
Thank you for listening. Catch us next week for another episode of Breaking Eggs with Seth Shezi. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. Until then, let's break.